Hi, welcome to another week of the OptiURX CEO membership video. I'm really excited about what we're going to discuss today. Today is going to be our cutting edge research video, and I think this one is really going to interest you and going to be a great example of why, one of the many reasons why I created the Foundational 4 and why one of those Foundational 4 is the OptiURX multivitamin. So we're just going to talk a little bit about a research study that came out in April of 2023 from the publication called Nature Metabolism. And it shows that the BMR, or basal metabolic rate, and I'll explain what that is here in a minute, we'll go through it, has decreased in the United States and Europe between 2 and 14.7% just since the 1990s. And that over the past 100 years, it's decreased about 50%, so it's basically half. Now, why is that important? What does that have to do with us? What does that have to do with being a CEO of our own health? And what does that have to do with the Foundational 4 and the multivitamin? All really good questions that I'm going to try to answer and make it really easy for you to understand why. So, basal metabolic rate is how many calories our body burns at rest. So, for example, I say if it were a Sunday and all I did was get up and go to church and sit on the couch the rest of the day and go to bed, how many calories would I burn essentially at rest? That's what that means. How many calories would we burn when we're just resting? Not when we're exercising, not when we're at work, just a daily basis of rest. So, the reason that's important is not because we want to count calories, because we know living an insulin-controlled life and taking the right supplements and sleeping and eating the right foods and doing the right exercise is the most important things. But why it does matter is because our basal metabolic rate plays a role in how much we can get away with. How many things can we take in? How many carbohydrates? How much sugar? How much can we burn off without having to put in a lot of extra effort? And this is important because the more muscle we carry, the higher our basal metabolic rate. So the number one thing that controls our basal metabolic rate is muscle. So how much muscle do we have? How much fat do we have? Because the more fat we have, the lower the basal metabolic rate. The more muscle we have, the higher the basal metabolic rate. And that's really important when we look at these studies from April of 2023 that shows that we're down between 2 and 14.7% since just the 1990s, and we're down probably 50%, they estimate, in the last 100 years. You have to understand that people are not gaining as much muscle, right? We're not carrying as much muscle as we used to. And that means that we're carrying more fat than we used to, which leads to chronic disease. So the obesity, the overweight is obviously out of control in the U.S. Carrying excess fat creates more fat. It creates more cortisol. It creates more adrenaline. It creates more issues. It can create more estrogen to be made in our body. So there's all these different hormonal aspects of carrying fat. But today we're going to talk about carrying more fat and having lower basal metabolic rates and how that affects us as we live. So the higher my basal metabolic rate, the more fat that I will be able to burn, whether I'm exercising or not. The more muscle that means that I'm carrying, which is obviously should be a goal for all of us. And if you're local and you haven't recently come in and done our InBody test, please do so. Our InBody 570 will measure muscle and fat in 5 different quadrants of the body. And it will also measure the most important number, I believe, on the test is visceral fat, or fat underneath the skin. We'll talk about that later, but it's fat around the organs, things like fatty liver and fat around our pancreas and kidneys, heart, lungs, different places. So we want to know and need to know as good CEOs what those numbers are. But the reason that we want to talk about this today is because if our basal metabolic rate is lower, according to all the research, how do we help it improve? Well, the number one way that we can do that on a daily basis is to take the Foundational 4. And I'm going to concentrate on just one ingredient of the many multitude of ingredients that I have in the multivitamin that I created. So one of the most overlooked vitamins, I think, that is in that formula is B3, as in boy 3, B3, vitamin B3. And that is known as niacinamide, nicotinamide. Most people would just call it niacin. But niacin is not the form that we would ever want to take. We want to take nicotinamide or niacinamide. So those are much more active forms of B3. Now, why is B3 important? Well, B3 has a ton of effects in our body, and our levels have gone down because our food is no longer very quality, which is why I thought here in the middle of the year it would be a great time to bring up why this is so important when we're talking about what we talked about in January, so 6 months ago, was eat real food. So we're gonna tie all this in. So vitamin B3, or niacinamide, is a vitamin that is crucial for energy metabolism. Our cells can't make energy without this niacinamide, just like you've probably heard me talk about before, how our bodies can't make energy in the cells without our 5 organic chelated salt magnesium. So these things are really, really important for us to understand, and of course the magnesium is another of the foundational 4. So this niacinamide is essential in energy production. This niacinamide is a precursor to a product in our body used for energy also called NAD+, and NAD+ has been linked, lack of NAD+, or lower NAD+, has been linked to all kinds of diseases, as has niacinamide, which makes sense since the body converts niacinamide to NAD+, and NAD+ can then be converted back to niacinamide. So it's really important that we have these, because it's not only the energy metabolism inside the cell, but it helps convert food to energy. It helps maintain DNA integrity, so we would have less of these DNA type diseases like cancer and things if we have sufficient niacinamide in our bodies. It has potent anti-obesity effects and helps inhibit the release of inflammatory PUFAs, PUFAS, or polyunsaturated fatty acids, and that's where we're going to really talk about our food and the things that we eat. And it can also, has been shown in the studies, to help prevent neurodegeneration, so a lot of nerve diseases, heart disease, kidney disease, and even shown to reverse leaky gut in some research. So niacinamide, or vitamin B3, is often overlooked. We hear a ton about B12. We may even hear about B1 and B2 occasionally, but we don't hear a lot about B3 typically. So I think that it's one of the overlooked ones that I have included in the OptiU multivitamin, because I'm looking at the research when I formulate a supplement, which is why you only want to use a professionally formulated, active ingredient, NSF International certified good manufacturing practice supplement of any kind ever. So that's a topic for another discussion too. But let's talk about what these PUFAs are, or these polyunsaturated fatty acids. Well, they are very inflammatory things that are in the American diet in very high amounts. And they are found in things that, unfortunately, the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, these folks promote these things in high amounts. And these are seed oils. So think things like soybean oils, or canola oil, or grapeseed oil, or peanut oil. These are all going to contain these polyunsaturated fatty acids. These are highly processed, corn oil is another one. These are highly processed oils that contain these PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, that are very damaging to our bodies. And they are found, of course, in almost all prepackaged, processed fast food from a drive-through, from any restaurant really, because they're almost all cooking with canola oil or corn oil or one of these oils. And why? Because they're cheap. They're cheap because they're government subsidized. So, you know, the government's involved. They give subsidies to these farmers to make these oils. Then they're processed, put on the shelves. They're put into the products that are on the shelves. We're told to cook with them by the American Heart Association, which is a tragedy, because they lead directly to heart disease. They lead to every inflammatory disease we can think of, which is anything from Alzheimer's in our brain, to kidney failure, to heart failure, to fatty liver. I mean, you just go through and you go, why in the world would we be putting these in, and why would they be recommending it? Well, there's a simple answer to that. Because they're cheap, and these companies pay the American Heart Association, they pay the American Diabetes Association to promote these things. So big food, I mean, right? They're paying to get their recommendations made. It's not about science in most cases. It's not about health. So if we go back to January, is where I'm going with this, and we think about eat real foods, cook your own foods, use only grass-fed butter or coconut oil to cook in. Never cook in these seed oils, these PUFAs, these polyunsaturated fatty acids. Don't eat things out of a box bag or a can because they're almost universally there. Don't go to a drive-through. They're going to universally be there. And even worse, if you're going to a restaurant and they continue to cook something like French fries or, you know, whatever people are eating. I actually had this is off the topic of exactly what we're talking about, but it's mind-blowing to me. I had a pharmacy student who's working with me right now from High Point University, where I teach my elective, and she went the other day to McDonald's and got what she told me was a fish sandwich. And I said, I really don't think there's any fish in McDonald's to speak of. And what I was getting at is the more they cook these fries or these fish sandwiches, they drop it in this typically canola oil or corn oil or soybean oil. The more times those oils are heated, the more damage they become, the more PUFAs they contain. And those are a problem because they take years to completely be replaced in our body once we stop eating them and start putting in the good fats like the butter or the coconut oil that we would cook with. And we can also put in other kinds of good fats like olive oil and avocado oil, but we would not cook with those because they're not meant to be heated. So that's a different video, but I want to make the point that niacinamide is protective against the body releasing these PUFAs from the fat cells. So if we can teach our body how to burn fat, and we can make our bodies fat-burning machines, and if we do that and we have adequate niacinamide, B3, in the system, it makes it much more unlikely that those would be released as they were coming out of our body. Those PUFAs would stay in the fat cell as we release and burn off that fat cell, rather than getting into the bloodstream where they create oxidative stress and can lead to disease. So I want you to know, when we think about a multivitamin, B3 is not something that even in my mind normally comes up, but when this research came out, I was like, this is a great time to talk about why we have professionally formulated products that I choose each and every ingredient. I choose the form of that ingredient, only the active form, and we don't put any of the junk in it. So hopefully what you see today will remind you of January. Let's eat real foods. Let's only eat things that we cook as much as possible, or that we know how they were cooked and what they were cooked in as much as possible. Because if we want to live this optimal life, and I know I do, you know, at 55, I feel 18 every day, and that's my goal for all of you, is to feel 18 every day, to have the mental energy, the physical energy, the clarity, the ability to work out, the ability to do whatever you want so you can enjoy life. We have to be good CEOs. We have to invest in ourselves, and part of that investment has to be taking the right quality supplements so that we can get in things like this good quality B3. All the other things that are in there are super important, and they work as a symphony. They work in harmony with each other. But I just wanted to point out one that's kind of overlooked in my mind is the B3. And hopefully this has been very informative to you. One of the things that I really want to start encouraging y'all to do is make sure you're at our live lecture and question and answer every month, or teaching session. I don't know lecture is the right word, but trying to learn together. Because as good CEOs, we have to learn. If we don't learn, we're not going to be able to continue to improve our health and learn new things. And I learn something new about health every day. You're probably sick of hearing me say it, but I learn something new about health every day, and then I'm trying to take the most important things that I learn and pass them on to this group. But the thing that I want to encourage you to do is participate in the live sessions, ask all your questions, and please invite your friends and your family and your church members and your co-workers that need to be a part of this membership so that they can learn. We're going to come into some really exciting videos coming up. We're going to talk about a lot of new topics. Take your action points each month, start to put those in place, and we're going to make a huge difference. And we've got some exciting things with new peptides that are the cutting edge of science and future medicine. Of course, we're always going to emphasize the 5 pillars of the OptiU program. God-given quality foods, the world's best nutritional supplements, which starts with those foundational 4 OptiU supplements that I formulated, water from a medical device, science-based exercise, rest and recovery. Take these action points, take those 5 pillars, implement them in your life, and see the changes that you can make no matter where you are or where you're starting from. We can help you improve if you're willing to listen, learn, and implement the changes. Thanks, and I'll see you next week.